It was made on a virtually impossible timeline. In an era when games would take 6 months or more to develop, E.T the Extra-Terrestrial was made in only 5 weeks in order to push it out in time for Christmas of 1982. And unfortunately, it played exactly like a game that was made in 5 weeks in order to push it out in time for Christmas in 1982. E.T. the Extraterrestrial has a distinction of being recognized as one of the worst video games of all time, and it's later become the face of what is perhaps the greatest recession the video game industry has ever seen, what is now known as the video game crash of 1983. Is it fair to blame E.T. for this crash? Or perhaps were there other reasons that it all came crashing down? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. We'll talk about the 1982 less than smash hit E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial for the Atari 2600 and look at all the causes, reasons, and effects of the great video game crash of 1983. So stick around and learn about our hobby's greatest recession as we take today's trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 67th episode of our Video Game Nostalgia podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week we take a look back at one title relevant to the current week in gaming history, and we talk about it. While doing so, we hope to teach you something new about the game, what it took from the world as its inspiration, and what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we're heading back to the moment in which it all came crashing down by looking at what is notoriously one of the worst video games of all time, E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial, released for the Atari 2600 in December of 1982. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who is also addicted to Reese's Pieces, my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, have you ever had to phone at home?
Oh yeah, many times, man.
Many,
I
many
had
times.
I had a car that just kept breaking down on me in college and had to get help.
I believe that's the plot of the E.T. the movie. He had a, ship that broke down and had to phone home for help.
While I was away visiting college, yeah.
Do you feel close to E.T.?
I am out of this world.
Ooh, that was quick thinking. I'm oddly impressed right now. Not even gonna lie.
I get that a lot.
So, what have you been playing in the previous week?
Well, this week's been mostly just RuneScape and New World.
How's New World?
A lot like RuneScape, but more high-res graphics.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of. It's very similar. It's a lot more of the skill, like you pick skills and you upgrade those skills, and there's a trading market where you can do quests. I mean, it's
So
basically any RPG.
So it's an MMO.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
it
cool.
is.
Yeah, cool beans.
How about yourself? What have you been playing?
I have been playing Forza, as have you. You mentioned that.
Yeah, there was one night of that.
Yeah, exactly. We played Forza, and I have also been playing Hades. I got back into that. I was a little disappointed. For whatever reason, my previous save file for Hades was nowhere to be found, so I had to start that over. Not the biggest loss. It's a great game. I don't mind at all, but still, a little disappointed when you lose progress. I started playing one of the Dark Pictures anthologies, Man of Medan. I don't know how they say it. I probably should have listened to the game. I know, right? And I think that is it. Yes. And hey, since the last time I recorded, we actually saw one another because I came to Michigan. Huh?
Yeah, you did.
That was pretty
Jonah?
cool. It was nice to
Yeah,
see you.
it was nice.
So, but yeah, so been up to some stuff and just playing catch up. Just playing catch up. So here we are, 67 episodes in, about to talk about a major point in the history of video games, a turning point, if you will, one that was definitely make or break for the industry. Do you know much about the video game crash of 83?
I didn't know there was a video game crash. I just know that E.T. was a terrible, terrible, terrible game, and
And
that there's a landfill just filled with them.
so you had no idea that you had no idea that the video game industry basically crashed, and it's noted as being one of the contributing factors.
I didn't know. No.
Okay, cool. Well, then you're going to learn a whole lot today. So our story today goes back to 1981 when Howard Scott Warshaw was hired to work at Atari. His first notable success was a early 1982 Atari VCS or 2600 title. The Atari video computing system, the VCS, is also known as the 2600. So, Atari title Yar's Revenge. So, Yar's, which interestingly enough is the best selling original game for the Atari 2600, was originally conceived as a licensed port of an arcade game called Star Castle. And not to get into it, but basically what happened was as Warshaw got into the development of this port, he realized that he couldn't port it over accurately because the Atari 2600, it was just the hardware limitations. It wasn't an arcade system. The arcade systems were big, beefy, sometimes multi-card units. They technologically they were a lot further ahead than the home consoles. They we hadn't got to that point with our home consoles where they had that much power under the hood. So he couldn't port it over, right?
Right.
And so what he basically did is he took the concept of what was Star Castle and he readapted it into a completely new game. And Yar's Revenge was, and might I add, is a success. It's typically regarded as the, you know, one of the best, definitely the best selling original titles for that system. So yay, Howard Scott Warshaw, great
Woo.
programmer, right?
Right.
So because of his success with Yars, he was asked next to design the video game adaptation of the film Raiders of the Lost Ark. So this was released later on in 1982 and was also a commercial success. So with two hits in a row, success with Yar, success with Raiders, it kind of earned him the nod to create a game based on what at the time was an incredibly successful summer blockbuster called E.T the Extra-Terrestrial. Rob, have you ever seen the E.T the movie?
I have, Dave.
You have. I think everyone's seen E.T the movie. E.T. phone home.
Yeah,
When it
that.
came, yeah, I know, right? So when it came time for the movie, when it came time for them to, when they were considering to making a game about the movie, Steven Spielberg specifically asked for Warshaw. They had kind of vaguely, interacted with Raiders, and Raiders was the game was such a success that Steven Spielberg said, "Hey, I want that guy to do this one." And so it came to be that on July 27th, 1982, Howard Scott Warshaw was called with the hopes of picking him to be developer of this new game. There was a catch though. The catch was that they wanted the game to be ready for the Christmas holiday. Now, this first phone call, came on July 27th. They needed the game in order to be ready for Christmas to be finished by September 1st, which left roughly
Oh,
5 weeks for ET to be finished on time.
thought it was a little longer than that. I knew it was short. I thought it was at least a couple months.
Nope.
Damn.
Nope, 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 nope. Now, I want to put this in perspective for members of our listening audience who have no concept on how long this stuff takes. Nowadays games are in development for years, so it's really not very fair to compare it to modern development. But let's look briefly at how long it took Warshaw to develop his successes, right? So Yar's Revenge took about 7 months of work, and Raiders of the Lost Ark took about 6 months of work. And so here he is. Steven Spielberg is asking him to make a game, and he's staring down the barrel of a 5 week deadline. I mean, that's just crazy, you know?
Yeah.
But who's going to say no to Steven Spielberg? You know what I
Well,
mean?
clearly not this group.
Clearly not not Warshaw.
Yeah.
So Warshaw originally conceived of a concept, a game concept, where he wanted there were four ideas. So the world, he had one. He had an objective. This is how he designs, right? He split his games into four ideas. You had the world, the objective, the path to achieve the objective, and the obstacles. So what he had in his mind was a six-sided world in which players could float around, and he wanted to adapt part of the film's plot, which was E.T. phoning home, as the goal. So in his mind, the player would have to gather all these parts to put the phone together, to call the ship, and he would have to be there at the ship to be picked up at at let's say extraction site to win the game. He saw obstacles, that would be in the way that would allow you to, be successful or not be successful. He The difficulty of the game in his mind was different time constraints, and he knew he was going to struggle with this with technical limitations like he did on Yar's Revenge. Um, and he also kind of had thought about the fact that he wanted adults that would chase the alien, just like in the movie, right?
Right.
And then the infamous pits. So in this game, there are holes you fall into that are pits, and the pieces of the phone would be in these pits. That was kind of designed as a way to make the world bigger. That was a device to make the world bigger, that he could make it because of technical limitations. So he took this concept, which was basically just a six-sided world going to find phone parts to phone home, and he presented it to Spielberg. And the truth is that Steven Spielberg was less than thrilled with this idea. So according to a later interview with Howard Scott Warshaw, Spielberg looked at him and said, "Couldn't you do something more like Pac-Man?"
Oh.
Well, well, Pac-Man was the thing.
I mean, I suppose, but
But Warshaw didn't just want to copy Pac-Man. No, that's not what he wanted to do. And so he stuck with his original vision, and he made the game just as he, kind of as best as he could have with his original vision. It's kind of funny because in hindsight, he says that maybe Steven Spielberg had a good notion in past interviews. Maybe Spielberg was right. In hindsight, maybe I shouldn't have created the worst video game of all time.
I mean, yeah, who knows?
So 5 weeks, writes the game, designs it, programs it. I think he had two other people worked on it with him. He had an artist, and he had someone who did the music, if I'm not mistaken. But he did everything else within the time period. As you can imagine, there was no testing of the game. Normally in this period, they would put it in front of do what's called an audience test. No time. Wasn't like they could make the game in 4 weeks and test it for one. Nope, nothing. They made the game in 5 weeks by September 1st, and they pushed it out in time for Christmas of 1982. So, have you ever played or come across this game before?
I haven't played it, but I've seen videos of it being played.
Okay. All right. So let's take a moment and talk about what it is. It's very much like it very much is Warshaw's original vision. E.T. is basically an adventure game. You are E.T. looking from the top down perspective. And basically, your goal is to collect 3 pieces of an interplanetary telephone. Now, these pieces, as I said, are found scattered randomly in pits. There is no time limit. You get an on screen that you have an energy bar, you have health basically. And anytime you perform an action, moving, teleporting, falling into the pit, crawling out of the pit, you lose energy. Uh, in order to not lose all your energy, there are Reese's Pieces. They would look like little round balls because this was 1982, which are used to restore the energy. And when you collect 9 of said Reese's Pieces, you can call Elliot to obtain a piece of the telephone. And then after you get all the phone pieces, all 3 pieces, you have to go to an area where you can use the phone and call your home planet. And then a timer appears, and you have to arrive back at a landing zone before it reaches 0. And that's it. If you get to the forest and you are there before the timer comes, our timer is up. A ship comes and takes you away. You go back home. Then the game starts over with the phone pieces in a different place. That's it.
That's it.
That's it. That's what all the hubbub is about. That is what all the hubbub is about. So, as we had talked about, the game is divided, it's 6-sided. There are 6 different environments. They're all different settings from the film, and each of them have the wells. You get your phone, you get out of it, and then, there's the enemies too. You get chased down by scientists, there's FBI agents, and then there were different difficulties that would affect the amount of people chasing you down, the speed of people chasing you down, and just the I guess that would be the overall difficulty. So yeah, that's the game in a nutshell. Interesting, huh?
Yeah, there's not much to it.
No, there's not much to it, but realistically, was there ever much to any game back then?
Oh, no, not at all.
No, I mean it's just a time period. I do remember playing E.T. I didn't understand it back then. I don't know if I would understand it better now. I honestly didn't have an opportunity to play it. I will. Um, there were other things going on for us, obviously, since I traveled. There were other things for us going on. I just remember not knowing what the hell was going on. That's the prevalent thought I have for ET, is that it was confusing and I didn't understand it, and so it's always been a bad game to me because I didn't understand it.
Yeah, it seems to be the case for a lot of people.
Well, I'm not alone. Let's take a look at it as a retrospective, because we're already we're already here. This game is typically regarded as one of the, if not the worst video game of all time. Commercially, it sold a ton of copies. We're talking millions of copies, millions of copies. But it was critically panned, and it was returned left and right. You know.
Mm.
But I guess the question is right off the bat, because I have more. I want to talk about the video game crash. Is, am I the only one? And to find out if I'm the only one, Rob, as usual, I pulled some user reviews, which you're going to get to read here in a moment, earlier than normal, in the middle of the episode, mixing it up a little bit.
Weird.
I know, right? But let's jump on that pretty early and find out if I'm crazy or if other people had issue with ET as well.
All right. Well, first up for mobile games, we have user Arajarn, who says, "Before I get onto the bad, I have to let you know how excited I felt when they were announcing a game based off that brilliant movie. After seeing that movie in theaters, it was a lifetime favorite of mine. Sometime later, I hear that they released a game of E.T., and I couldn't sleep for many nights. As soon as I get the game, I'm thrilled because I believed I was going to have a blast. But enough talk, let's talk about the flaws about this garbage. As soon as I get past the title screen, I see E.T. landing on Earth in a pint sized spaceship. Now, I believe he was stranded on Earth as the other aliens seem to forget him. So far, the game hasn't followed the film too much, but I'll let it slip. The game doesn't give you any instruction in what to do, but you have to find all the parts of a phone in order to phone home. Who in the right mind would just break a perfectly useful mobile phone and scatter the pieces around the area in order to make our job even harder? Now, you'd think that we just got it all sorted out, right? No. The confusion has just begun. You then have to wander through many different places and collect stuff while trying to withstand a time limit as well. Anyway, back to the phone. To collect some of the parts, you have to fall into these random holes in the ground and collect the phone part. In order to get out, you have to raise ET's neck to fly. Remember that from the movie? There's just so much crap in this game. I could spend all day writing about the bad. But you know what? I won't. On to the bottom line. Whoever made this game better phone home. Because if I find him, I'm going to force him to play this game so that he can know how much misery he has caused me. As a kid, I thought that the game was playable for 5 minutes. I'm starting to wish that I put a copy of the game in the Atari landfill of September 1983. Yes, it's really that bad, and you don't want to play it. I may have forgotten a few minor points about the game, but I haven't played it for over 20 years.
Okay, so maybe I'm not the only one.
No, maybe not, Dave. Well, I mean, I guess we can find out from the next one, who also from Moby Games is Ashley Pomeroy, who first played this game a couple of years after it came out, when she was 10 years old or so. She says it didn't seem all that bad at the time, and a lot of the subsequent criticism, which had been heaped on the game, just seems to be bandwagon jumping. It's no worse than any of the other 2600 adventure style games, such as Raiders of the Lost Ark, and, well, adventure, I suppose, although the latter has historical interest. It has a nice theme tune and a good picture of E.T. The game is simple enough to play and passes the time well enough. The graphic of E.T. during the game captures his likeness effectively. If you get bored, you can make his head go up and down, and up and down, up and down. However, ET is nowadays a notorious software failure. Atari paid a lot of money for the ET license, and when the game underperformed, thousands of unsold cartridges were buried in landfills, and there was no demand for them, and it was cheaper than storing them or selling them at a loss. The major gameplay element involves exploring a set of holes in the ground, something which wasn't in the film. But perhaps due to a lack of testing, it's very easy to fall back into the holes after you've clambered out. Furthermore, several of the screens have holes in such a position that if you enter the screen from a certain direction, you tend to automatically fall into them. It's frustrating. Fandango Trombone. The basic gameplay makes no sense if you don't have the instructions, as it is based around a set of icons which are meaningless in themselves. E.T. is a notorious flop as a game. It's so frustrating and hard to follow, but easier to complete than most of the few other 2600 adventures. Haunted House, however, thrashes it in every respect. The tale of surplus cartridges being pulped and buried gives it a certain cultural resonance, and along with the shoddy conversion of Pac Man, it's an icon of the 1983 video games crash.
Yep, it's definitely a symbol of it. That's for sure. Well, that's two. Should we go for the trifecta?
Sure thing, Dave. And to hit us with lucky number 3, we have Servo from Moby Games, who says that considering that programmer Howard Scott Warshaw completed this game in about 5 to 6 weeks, at the time, games usually took about 6 months, as Dave said. It's amazing the game was finished at all, let alone as good as it is. The title screen looks quite good with the ET logo and drawing, and in game graphics are solid with no flickering sprites, plenty of color, and varied screens, which really weren't out of line with other 1982 era 2600 games. Sound effects are okay and include a decent rendition of the ET theme. With multiple skill levels and randomized locations for parts you need to find, there's some replay value. Adventure style games are tough to make work with just a joystick and one button. Figuring the game out isn't particularly intuitive, and without the instruction manual, it's easy to wander about with no idea what's going on. Once you figure out how to play, the game at least makes some sense and can be completed. Unfortunately, it just doesn't hold my attention too long as I found the gameplay rather slow and unexciting. Falling down pits repeatedly is probably the most frustrating aspect, and even though it's not too hard to get out, after a while, it can still become tiresome. Had more time been given to the development of this game, it probably could have been made much more interesting. This game has a reputation for being one of the worst 2600 games made, if not one of the worst for any platform. While the game isn't very good and gameplay is overall rather dull, far worse games have been made before and after this. Many for the 2600 for some examples. Take a look at Airlock or Skeet Shoot. Later on, Active Enterprises would release 53 games that were much worse, which were contained in Action 52 and Cheetah Men 2. I don't think any of these and many other really bad games are often remembered since E.T. was heavily promoted and vastly overproduced due to the popularity of the movie. Rumors of a significant number of copies being dumped in a landfill doesn't help its reputation much either, which I think is usually too harsh. There definitely wasn't a rumor they did find landfills.
They did find landfills.
Well, Dave,
They definitely found landfills.
it sounds like not everyone hated it because some people enjoyed the game for what it was. Because, I mean, considering that it was done in a fraction of the time, maybe it wasn't the worst piece of crap.
No, it was.
Yeah, no, fair enough, fair enough.
No, it was. Even Howard Scott Warshaw has a really good sense of humor about it, because a no matter what the reputation of the game is, all of his gaming titles sold over 1 million copies. There aren't a lot of developers that back then could say that.
True.
And he has two of his titles are the best original, what's seen as one of the best original games for the Atari in Yar's Revenge, and what's typically seen as the absolute worst title for everything in ET. And so he says there's probably no other developer that can brag about the range of their games that I can. So yeah,
Nice.
I know. I know. Well, I mean, come on, he made it in 5 weeks, man. That's great. Kudos to him. Guy got paid. I think it's like $200,000 to for 5 weeks of work.
Jeez.
Yeah, yeah, for real. But yeah. So ET has become the face of the great video game crash of 1983. And so let's spend some time talking about the great video game crash of 1983. Have you ever heard of the video game crash before?
It doesn't. Not, I'm trying to think of it, and I don't think in any of the documentaries or things that I've watched that I've heard about it.
But
Surprisingly,
about ET. It's just
right?
weird. It's just weird because typically, like, the two are always put together for me. Like, I don't know. I guess that's it. Like, you always hear, well, ET contributed to the great video game crash. The great video game crash, and I don't know. It's just weird for me to see separate. So, well, Rob, there was a great video game crash in 1983.
Whoa,
Crazy, right?
crazy!
I know. So that's what we called it in North America. In Japan, it was called the Atari Shock. And it was basically a huge, and I mean huge, fucking death defying recession in the video game industry that lasted nearly 2 years. It led to the bankruptcy of several companies that made home computers, that made video game consoles, and left analysts, critics, consumers really questioning whether or not video games were going to stick around, period. It also pretty much, so it was already waning, but it was also kind of the death knell for the golden age of arcade games. Um and so it wasn't just home consoles, which is where it's known for. It affected the arcade game market too. Um yeah, kind of helped bring about the end of the golden age of arcades, you know. Mm, Probably for you, what you want to know is, or maybe not, what everyone wants to know. So the video game crash really brought to an end rather abruptly what is known as the second generation of console gaming in North America. Do you know what generation we're on now?
No.
What do you think? How many
Hmm.
consoles do you think? How many generations of video games?
12.
No, we're not up to 12 yet.
Damn.
I
Is it
know.
7?
No, it's more than seven. We're on the ninth right now,
Okay.
actually. We're on the ninth. We're definitely on the ninth. And funny enough, the second, we say that it brought it to an abrupt stop, but technically the second generation of video game consoles lasted from 1976 to 1992. Do you know why it lasted all the way to 1992?
Hmm. Nope. Can't say that I do.
Because the Atari 2600 was in production until 1992.
Oh,
Think about that. Well, let's go. When did the Atari come out? Do you know that roughly?
1980s
Actually,
or 70s?
1977.
Yes,
Yeah,
77. Late
yeah,
70s.
yeah. 1977 to 1992. Do you know how many? Take a wild guess on how many Atari 2600s were sold.
Hmm. 20,000.
Oh, you got to do way better than that.
More?
Way, way, way more. Atari 2600. We just talked about and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but we just talked about how the game sold millions of copies.
Okay, maybe millions of people were bought. No, okay. Hold on though. Millions of copies were bought, but everything ended up in a landfill. How do you know it's not just that the company reported millions sold because they bought them to sell to landfills?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's a good one.
Okay, but Atari 2600s would probably say 3.7 million.
No, it's more. That would honestly not even. And television sold 3 million copies. And
How
that
much does like
was
Xbox and PlayStation sell now?
okay. All right, I knew you were going to ask that, so I actually pulled up the statistics. So at the moment, according to sales in the current generation, well, I can't pull up the current generation. I can only pull up the last one for official sales. The PlayStation 4 sold 112 million units, and
God damn.
and the Xbox One sold 51 million units. In case you didn't know that,
Okay.
and the Switch sold 89 million units.
So with those numbers, okay, let's try closer to 200. Well, no. I'd say 150 million.
No, gaming wasn't that big back then. It's actually
Uh,
it's 30 million. The Atari 2600 sold 30 million units. So, and to kind of put into
wow.
perspective, the NES sold 61 million units. So, we started kind of going up from there. And then the SNES sold 50 million units. The PlayStation sold 102 million units. And we just kind of we just kind of keep going up from there. So yeah, so here we are. We got a little sidetracked because I love all that number stuff. The second generation of console gaming. So there are generally seen to be four overall causes for the crash, and let's talk about the first one. The first one is known to be a flooded console market in the context of the second generation of gaming consoles. So I would really like to do specific episodes on the generation someday. So I'm not going to go into too much detail more than what we already have. But basically, what you need to know is that the Atari 2600 became a runaway success when Space Invaders was ported over to the system. Instantaneously, almost a million copies of that game was sold, and suddenly everybody wanted a piece of that pie, right? And so you had competition. You had the Odyssey come out, and the Intellivision, the ColecoVision, the Vectrex, and there was even Atari tried to one up themselves by releasing the Atari 5200, which was just a more powerful system. Now, let's not mention that the second generation of gaming's here. We had just come off the first generation of console gaming. So the first generation of console gaming was basically like Pong clones and a lot of those like one game systems, that you could take home and play, because swappable game cartridges didn't really come out until towards the end of the first gen, beginning of the second gen, basically. And so to kind of give you an idea on how bad the first generation was and how probably saturated the market was. So we know of officially of roughly about 1,000 different home video game consoles that were produced in the entirety of video game history. Okay, 1,000 consoles. Can you believe that?
That no.
Well, from the second generation on, only 100 have been reviewed or have been made. So roughly about 900 consoles were made in the first generation of what's considered a console made in the first generation of gaming.
Jesus.
Hey, little fun fact: there's only one company that made a first gen system that still makes games today. Do you know who it is?
No.
Think about OG. Think about old school. Who?
Apple.
No, not Apple. Apple's not. I mean, technically they're around, but not Apple. No, you'd know them. You're gonna know this. Just think about it for a second. Who's an old school gaming console manufacturer?
Atari.
No, no, Atari didn't survive this process, honestly.
Well, that's what Atari is like the only thing I can think of at the moment. Like,
It's Nintendo.
anyway, NES was considered first gen.
No, NES is third gen, but they made consoles in the first and second generation too. There were Nintendo systems before the NES.
Have we talked about them?
We never have talked about them. No, no, we have not. No, we have not. And that's kind of why I want to talk about the generations at some point, because I think it'd be fun to look at some of the differences as we go forward. So,
Yeah, I didn't know there was something before the NES, so this is news.
yep, yeah. Now, like I said, you got to consider the first generation is a lot of one-off, like non-swappable cartridge systems. So, like the early Nintendos were like, maybe a Nintendo Pong clone, or I think there was a Nintendo racing game, that you could just hook up to the TV and play the one game. So those
Okay.
are that's the first gen. Um, that was the first gen, just so you know. But it's the only one who's left. And I mean, technically, Atari is still the around, but they're not making consoles. I guess they are now, huh?
Yeah, they are
Yeah,
now.
but you get what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, 900, 1,000. Well, 900. 900. So gaming consoles were everywhere, absolutely everywhere. You also had competition from home computers. It was in 1977 that the earliest inexpensive home computers were sold in stores. And so, right then and there, began the age old argument of what's better, console gaming or PC gaming. No joke, 1977. We joke around about about that nowadays, but that's an age old argument.
Wow.
You know, by the time this all rolled around, 1982, because 1982 is when everything happened. Desktop computers could provide better color graphics. They could provide better sounds, and so there was a lot of competition there. Gamers are gamers. We eat that shit up, right?
Right.
And then in 1982, a price war began between Commodore and TI, Texas Instruments, that led to home computers being sold for about the same price as video game consoles. In June of 1983, Commodore cut the retail price of the Commodore 64 to $300. And some retailers sold it even cheaper, where there are advertisements for it being sold as low as $199, which is about what the consoles were selling for. So when you have your choice between a gaming computer and a console for the same price, which one are you going to pick?
Yeah, that's an easy answer on the computer.
It was still an easy answer back in 1982.
I'm not surprised.
Despite the price drops, demand for home computers actually slowed down in the summer of 1983 here in June. That's why they cut the price. And so they cut the price thinking that the demand for computers was going to wane, right? It was
Right.
it was going to die down, so they started making less. And then Christmas hit, and the demand for these gaming PCs shot through the flipping roof. Everyone was frankly left with their pants down. It was so bad that, for instance, the major retail chain J.C. Penney, which is still around to this day, barely, but still around, J.C. Penney announced in December of 1983 that they were no longer going to be carrying home computers because, frankly, the low pricing of them and the not being able to get them, no supply, left it not worth their time whatsoever. So retailers couldn't get computers and said, "We're out." Next, we basically have, so in 1979, four Atari programmers left Atari because they felt they weren't getting the recognition they deserved, right? So Atari was owned by Warner Communications. Yes, that Warner Communications. Now they're one of the largest telecom companies. And so they saw other people in Warner, actors, directors, musicians, getting all this money and accolades, and they said, "Hey, we feel that we're creating art too. We should be getting the same recognition as those guys." It's pretty logical, right?
Right.
Do you think I think nowadays some game developers have celebrity status. I think that's a fair statement.
Yeah, I would say so.
We have the not Miyazaki, Miyamoto's, and the crap, Concerned Ape is pretty popular, and Cliffy B, and I could go on, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So these four Atari programmers, they left Atari and they formed Activision. So prior to Activision being formed in 1979, there were no third-party developers whatsoever. Not Nintendo. Atari made games for Atari, Commodore made games for Commodore, and so on and so forth. But Activision changed that, completely changed the landscape of the market. They created games like Pitfall. Pitfall sold over 4 million copies, and it was ported over to everything. And when people saw what Activision had done, they wanted in. They wanted in, just like everyone wanted in on the console wars. Game developers wanted in on the success of a third party developer. To put this into perspective, the CES Consumer Electronics Show in 1982, there were 17 companies developing games for the Atari who had in their pipeline around 900 new games that they announced, or 990, not 900, Jesus Christ, 900. Woo! So 17 companies, 90 games. A year later, in 1983, there were over 100 companies trying to present their games at CES. So 90 new gaming companies, roughly in the course of a year. And
Hmm.
to put it into one other perspective, in June of 1982, there were just over 100 games available for the Atari. But by December of 1982, there were over 400 games available for the Atari.
Wow.
Now, it's not like common time. I think that if we were to talk about that right now, I don't think that that's unreasonable because digital distribution has completely changed the way we look at gaming and gaming markets, right? I think that's fair.
Yeah, I'd say so.
But at the time, there weren't internet where people could learn about games, and there wasn't, there wasn't a place that you could just go and download games. Like, you had to physically go to a game store and walk around for God knows how long, reading the descriptions on the box to decide what game you want. And an aisle with 100 games is one thing, but suddenly you had 400 games. I mean, they're just, they weren't ready for it.
You telling me there wasn't just an entire channel with nothing but commercials of these games?
No, honestly, I remember that I would get all of my news about new games from magazines. I used to be so excited for every month's magazine because it was the only way I found out what new stuff was coming out. And you were so excited to go through the pages to find, like, oh, this game they announced it. Oh my God, they announced that game. When's this going to come out? And that was it. That's what we had, like, magazines.
Wow.
So we have looked at a flooded console market, and we've looked at competition from home computers, and now we just talked about a loss of publishing control, right?
Right.
Activision basically, um, and there's more to that story. We may get into it someday. Atari wasn't happy when Activision did that, so they sued them, and basically, lost. Activision could make games, but they had to pay licensing rights to Atari, which became the standard for the market, licensing rights to the consoles. Everyone does it still. Um, so yeah, yeah. But that brings us to E.T. Where does E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial fall into all this?
Well, it sucked.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, pretty much.
So people probably didn't like that very much and
No.
thought that all games would start to suck.
Yeah, pretty much. That's exactly it. It the fourth cause typically seen as a complete lack of consumer loss or lack of consumer confidence, right? So prior to 82, Atari was the dominant company in the video game industry. But for all the reasons we have now been talking about, they started to slip. They were no longer the top dog. And so they made a series of decisions to try to get back or stay at the top that just didn't work out. And these decisions caused everyone to lose confidence in them. And since they were the face of the whole industry took the egg on its face, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a company, as they started to slip, Atari started to focus on business opportunities as opposed to innovation in gaming. They had some success porting over some arcade hits, and so they really just began to look for any and all lucrative licensing opportunities that they felt would just give them the leg up on the competition. And so this is where ET came from. But it's not the only game that contributed to this. ET is only half the discussion. The other half was Pac-Man. So believe it or not, when Pac-Man, they licensed it and they ported it over to the Atari 2600, it was awful. It was not a good port. It had awful graphics. It played awful. It just was not by any means a good representation of Pac-Man. But it was Pac-Man, man. You know what I mean?
Yeah, how could they get it wrong?
Yeah, and so you had all these people who bought millions of copies of Pac-Man and millions of copy of ET by Atari, your biggest video game company in the world, and they sucked. And suddenly everyone was like, I don't think so." You know,
Yeah, that's pretty unnerving.
these were the big ones. These were the face. Pac-Man and ET were the ones that just caused everything. They were the ones that really left a bitter taste in everyone's mouth. But the truth of the matter is that bargain titles were flooding the market. All these games, 400 and some odd games, they were once selling for $35, but no one could get rid of them anymore, and so there were literally bins of $5 games just laying around. And communication wasn't like it is today. Information wasn't prevalent, and so people really truly shop by price, not by quality. So parents were digging games out of these $5 bins and taking them home, and all these games were bargain titles. They were awful. And so people were like, well, maybe this fad is over, you know? I mean, it makes
Was it, Dave?
sense. At the moment, it was. Hell yeah. Companies began to bow out of the video game market all over the place. Magnavision said, nah, we're done with video games. Other publishers were out. Atari, by mid 1983, they had lost $356 million through this mess and were forced to lay off about 3,000 people. Then comes the famous landfill episode, or landfill incident, whatever you want to call it. So yes, the urban legend is that they had a ton of unsold cartridges of specifically of ET, and that they were famously buried in a New Mexico landfill. The truth of the matter is, yes, there were a lot of cartridges that were indeed buried there. There's a really fascinating documentary that came out in 2020, I think it was last year, that tells you the whole story about it. The truth of the matter is, though, what you'll find out is that the urban legend is kind of true, but they only buried about 728,000 copies of the game, not millions.
Uh,
And
Seems
then
much more reasonable.
Yeah. And then Atari just kind of continued to lose money, right? By the end of 1983, it was their losses were 500 some million, and so Warner Communications said, we're done." They sold Atari to Commodore in 1984. Commodore took Atari and pushed them onto the home computer realm because Atari had their ST, and Atari would kind of, kind of stay along for a little while until they made the Jaguar, and then kind of implode. Kind of like the industry did in 1983. Virtually no games were developed in 1984. No systems, no innovations, nothing. Can you imagine a whole year where video games just weren't made, nothing new? Might give it
Uh,
actually might be nice now because we could get caught up more so on our huge backlog.
yeah, I don't know. It'd be kind of weird, but there's definitely been a year or two where I didn't get anything new and just waited it out.
Well, there wasn't anything new to be had. Okay, look. So I'm a I'm gonna sum up. I'm gonna sum up how bad this video game crash was, and then we can take it out of here. In 1983, sales of home video game consoles and games in the United States were $3.2 billion. In 1985, they only amounted to $100 million.
Oh,
A little bit of a loss.
a little bit. Yeah.
Just a little bit.
Ouch.
That's a big swing.
Yeah, that's ginormous.
Yeah. It was a serious recession. It wasn't like, hey, we kind of lost money, and so we're hesitant. It was, we seriously lost a lot of fucking money, and we don't think we want to do this anymore. Now, it wasn't as bad. Truthfully, it wasn't as bad outside the United States. It wasn't as bad outside the United States. It's called the Atari shock in Japan because the shock waves went to Japan and affected it, but Japan was in a little economic bubble and their gaming companies were doing well, and so they weren't affected. I think across the world, the whole market lost like 14 or 15 billion dollars, which was like a third of the worldwide market. I should have put that down there. Really wanted to focus on the North American side of it. Point is that it still kind of went strong in Europe and Japan, and thank God it did, because um, if it hadn't, we may not be where we are now, because it was a little successful Japanese company, that stepped in and saved the day. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
But I want to save that story for another day, because for those of you who don't know, it was the Nintendo Entertainment System, Nintendo, who came in and brought their home console over to United States, and that really revitalized the gaming industry. And it said that if they hadn't done that, there might not be a North American video game industry like the one we have now. Um, but the story of the Nintendo, I want to tell specifically because it's really fascinating, because they actually had to change the console, the design of it. The reason why the Nintendo looks so different in the United States is because they made it purposely look as far away from other consoles as possible, because they were afraid that people were going to not buy it because it looked like a video game console. And so, one little fun fact I will leave you with before we close it out for today is, if you think about it, then the NES looks more like a blocky VCR than some of the cool, sleek video game systems prior to that. And that's the reason why. So,
Wow.
it's cool if you think about. No, really. Do you remember what the Japanese Famicom looks like? The top loading, like the red system that you top load cartridges in?
Yeah.
And then they brought over the United States, and what does it look like? It's a gray box.
Yeah. Well, you know,
That's the reason. Little fun fact. So
that actually is pretty cool.
it's very cool. But yeah, that's I have a Nintendo episode planned for next year. So we'll talk about that when we talk about the Nintendo. But that, my friend, is in less than an hour. Actually, that was more like 30-minute primer on the video game crash of 1983. What do you think?
Very interesting to learn, and great to see that video games bounced back and made a recovery.
Did they though?
I think so. Yeah,
Yeah.
just a wee bit.
Yeah. You got any questions?
I mean, I have a lot of questions, but none that pertain to the current topic at hand.
Ooh, there you go, smartass. Well, if anyone out there would like to learn more about the video game crash, there are other, not really causes, but there's some fascinating stuff I will post the links for. If you'd like to look at detail about the first generation of gaming, console gaming, or the second generation of console gaming, or just do some more reading on it, I'll post all my links on the show notes, on our website at www.memorycardlane.com. Also on memorycardlane.com, you will find a calendar of upcoming events, though we really need to put up the first quarter of the year. So that'll be coming soon. And there is a biography. There's a submission button if you'd like to submit your own ideas, questions, comments, etc., for a chance for us to review them, here on the air. There's also a link to our Discord where you can join our community, play games with us, complain to us, scream about how wrong I am, because yes, that's a legit thing that happens. And our social media links are on there. I can be found on Twitch at David is Wrong. Rob, what you got going on social media?
It can be found on twitch.tv/FATBOIRIPZ.
Awesome. Well, this is about the time in each episode where we wrap it up. Every week we try to teach you something new about a game, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world as its legacy. I think today we have a lot of each column in there, but as part of our learning process, we like to go roundtable and talk about our biggest takeaways for the week. So, Rob, what is your biggest takeaway from today's episode?
The video gaming crash.
What was specifically shocking?
The fact that it could go from 3.2 billion to 100 million.
I'm gonna tell you,
and
yeah,
still today be a thing.
yeah. So I mean, I know about the crash, and the reasons, and a lot of that was not review, but I think that's the first time I ever really paid attention to the scale of it, and I didn't realize how drastic it was. That was my big takeaway too. I guess I never really paid that close attention before, but wow, that's what they call a recession. You know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely, it is. It's insane, and just the fact that they were able to come back from it at all.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to take it out for today. Before I give our little teaser for next week, what else would you like to add?
As always, I have to take a moment to say thank you to everyone for listening. It is an honor. We enjoy doing this. We love doing this. We hope you're enjoying it too. And, we love to hear about it. So be sure to let us know what you think.
Yes, please let us know what you think. It's nice to get feedback. We only want to get better for you guys, positive or negative feedback. Either way, as long as it's constructive, we will take it. Hop on those Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts and give us that rating and tell us in the world what you think about us. That would be great. So yeah, I echo that sentiment. Thank you and help us do more. So with that being said, let's look forward to next week. So our game next week was one of the earliest examples of advertising in video games. Originally sponsored by Anheuser-Busch, the arcade version of Tapper was designed to be placed in bars with cabinets that sported brass rail footrests and brass drink holders. But it was only one of many video games that had advertising in them, which gives us a really good starting point to talk about video games as a whole that were created as corporate advertisements. So that's our topic for next week. We're gonna look at corporate, what do they call it? Advertainment. It has a specific genre where it's like one of them is Chex Mix. We talked to our Chex Quest. Remember Chex Quest?
Ah, yes, yes.
Chess Quest and Sneak King, Burger King Sneak King. Didn't I send you that picture of that guy who had over 2,000 copies of Sneak King recently?
You sure did, Dave.
Whew, man, I don't know. So, anyways, we're going to be taking a look at all these video games that were specifically created as corporate advertisements. It's really fascinating. There's a lot that I never knew before researching. So, join us again next week. Grab those foil hats and don't let the subliminal marketing get to you. As we take a buy more, buy more, please buy more, buy trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Do 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 ba do ba do ah.